Hello and welcome back to Around the Table from the Meeting Point, broadcasting not only to Bilbao but throughout the world. I hope you like our slow TV background today. Another beautiful sunrise over Bilbao, another in our series of sky backgrounds. Maybe we should change the name of the channel to Sky TV, or maybe that's already been used. We might get in trouble if we do that. So, this week we were talking about games. But before we do that, let's have an amazing fact. And this week's amazing fact comes from a documentary I was watching on Thursday night. So those of you that are in the Friday groups will have already heard my amazing fact. It was about the history of London. And yes, we pronounce it London. One of the amazing facts was I discovered that it used to be spelt London, just like we say it. Why they changed the spelling, I have no idea, because we didn't change the pronunciation. Anyway, my amazing fact about London was that it reached a population of 1 million people in the year 1810. That was the first city to reach 1 million people since ancient Rome. Apparently Rome got to 1 million people. They had a very elaborate water system, so they managed to get fresh water in from the mountains into the city. Whereas in London we had to rely on beer and tea to survive. Well, they reached 1 million people in 1810. Okay. Then they reached 2 million people in 1840. So it only took another 30 years to get the next million people into London. They reached a population of 3 million in 1860. So it only took another 20 years to get the next million. And then, yes, you've guessed it, the population got to 4 million by 1870. So it only took another 10 years. So can you imagine living in London through that period and watching the population grow to such an extent? It must have been quite amazing. And talking population growth, I read a book once about the early industrial revolution and the growth of cities like Manchester. Here's an interesting fact or two about Manchester. In the 1820s, I think it was, the life expectancy in Manchester, for most of Manchester, the life expectancy was 16 years old. Yes, 16, 1-6. Not 60, but 16. If you lived in the expensive area of Manchester, the average was up to, I think it was 32 or 34. If you lived in Manchester, it was not a healthy place to live. The mortality rate was extremely high. One of the reasons being the sanitation, because there was one toilet for every 250 people. So imagine that. Imagine that's the worst rock festival you've ever been to. One toilet for every 250 people. That's why they died so young. Now let's look at interesting word. We were looking at compound words and the difference between a bottle of beer and a beer bottle. If you have a compound like beer bottle, the first word is describing the second word. So bottle is the more important noun here. So a beer bottle is a type of bottle. A wine bottle is a type of bottle that would be used for wine. A milk bottle is another type of bottle which is used for milk. So the first word is describing the type of bottle, and the second word is the most important noun. That's called a compound. So a bottle of beer is a bottle that contains beer. It's not describing the style of the bottle. It's a bottle that contains beer. A bottle of wine is a bottle that contains wine, and a bottle of milk is a bottle that contains milk. So when you have a something of something, carton of milk, a box of chocolates, a packet of crisps, Normally, when we're speaking very quickly, you don't hear the F in of. People say a packet of biscuits, a bottle of milk, a pint of beer, packet of cigarettes. Okay? When we say of, you don't hear the F. So it could be written O apostrophe. But of course we never write it like that. Except on one occasion, when we write the time, 6 o'clock. Now, not many people realise that a long time ago, people used to say, the time is 6 of the clock. And it slowly got contracted down. So in that situation, there is O apostrophe clock. And that's what it means. Another interesting etymology. Again, if you were around in the classes on Fridays, you've already heard this because we were talking about it in class. When people left and went off on a journey, you would say, God be with you. God be with you. The old-fashioned form of you in the singular was ye or ye. People often wonder why we don't have a singular and a plural when we say you. It can refer to one person or lots of people. In actual fact, it is the plural. The singular disappeared. But if you listen to people speaking, they very rarely say you. They normally say something like yeah, how are you, etc. Okay, so they don't really say you anyway. But there used to be this form ye or ye. So people would say God be with ye. And then the with got contracted down to a sort of a wi, God be with ye. And then it got contracted down again to God be ye. And then because everybody said good morning and good afternoon and good evening, the God got extended to good. And that is why goodbye is this week's interesting word. So let's begin the conversation of the week. And this week Usoa's away, so I am joined by my new friend that I found inside the computer.
Hello everybody.
So let's begin the conversation, shall we?
So, what was the topic of the week this week, Richard?
This week we have been talking about games.
Oh, that sounds really interesting.
Games was the topic. We've been discussing all kinds of games, not sports, but more the kind of games you play at home, games that you played when you were children, games that we play with the family at Christmas. For example, board games. We were discussing board games.
Board games. Are they like boring games?
No, this is board as in B-O-A-R-D, not bored B-O-R-E-D, even though the pronunciation, of course, is exactly the same. No, board games are games that are played on a board. So chess is a board game because you have a chessboard. And there are other games like Monopoly and Risk and Trivial Pursuit and games like that, which are very popular to play around the table with your family, with your brothers and sisters. And most people agree that Monopoly is one of the most boring board games, mainly because the first few people are eliminated quite early, and then there are usually 2 people left at the table for the next 3 hours. So we don't recommend Monopoly. Although Scrabble was a very interesting one that we were talking about, because it's very useful to practice your vocabulary. And my interesting fact this week was that the Spanish Scrabble Championship was held recently, and it was won by someone from New Zealand who doesn't even speak Spanish. But apparently he got the book of legal words that are permitted in Spanish Scrabble, because each Scrabble association publishes a book of words that are permitted in the game. And he got hold of the Spanish book and memorized all of the words, even though he doesn't know what they mean. So he doesn't speak Spanish, but he knows all of the words in Spanish, if that makes any sense. And he won the Spanish Scrabble Championship, which seems like a very strange thing to do. a lot of effort because I'm sure there wasn't a huge prize. If there was millions of pounds at stake, then it would be worth going to all that effort.
That's amazing.
Yes, it is. We were also discussing the pack of playing cards and what a wonderful invention the pack of playing cards is. Hearts, clubs, diamonds and spades. 52 cards in the pack, at least the pack that I've always used. And endless hours of entertainment. Because with such a simple pack that fits in your pocket, very easy to carry with you, there are just millions of different games that you can invent. Hours and hours of entertainment, and very cheap. So probably one of the best entertainment inventions ever. And then we were talking about games that you would normally play in bars and pubs. And of course, everybody was very keen to tell me about Moose this week, though not everybody understands how it's played. It seems quite complicated with lots of interesting sign language between the players.
What kind of games are typically played in pubs in England?
I suppose the most popular game to be seen in pubs in England would be pool, which is a game that is played with lots of balls on a table, and you hit them with a stick called the cue, and you knock them down the little holes, and the holes are called pockets. And the game that you normally see is called pool. I don't think it's exactly the same as American pool. I think maybe in America they have different rules because the balls have numbers on. So I think there's a different scoring system. There are other games which are related to that, such as billiards. I'm not exactly sure what billiards is. And then there is snooker, which is on a very big table. And that's the professional game that you might see if you're watching Eurosport. And that is an incredibly difficult game to play. So pool, I think, is the most common one that you see in the pubs. A lot of pubs have a dart board. There's another board, the dart board, for playing darts, where you throw the little arrow things and score points, which again is a very complicated game, especially if you're not good at mathematics, because some of the darts players seem to have incredible mathematics skills, because you start off with 501 and you have to go down to 0. And yes, it's quite complicated. And I always admire people's mathematical skills when they're playing that. And another game that we often play, at least in the West Country of England, there are lots of places at the back of pubs called skittle alleys where you can play skittles.
What is Skittles?
Skittles is a game which is very similar to American 10-pin bowling, where you roll the ball down the alley and you have to knock over, I don't know if there are 10 things in Skittles, maybe there are 9. I think there are 9 in Skittles. And they're called pins. Those are the things you knock over. So it's very similar principle, but you don't have to wear special shoes. You go straight from work. You come in from the fields or from the building site and you leave a mess all over the floor. Everybody shouts a lot. It's quite a noisy game. And yes, it's a bit of an unsophisticated country version of 10-pin bowling. And we don't have an elaborate machine to put the skittles back up. We have a small child. And if you are in my town and you want a bit of pocket money, you can often get a job setting up skittles. And all of the players, the adults, give you money at the end. And they give you a bottle of Coca-Cola and a packet of crisps. When you're a small child, it's a very good way of getting a little bit of money. So Skittles is very similar to 10-pin bowling. And then we were discussing other similar games that you have around here near Bilbao and probably in the rest of the world, because games such as Skittles and 10-pin bowling are very universal. It seems that mankind has an ability, when given a ball, to say, I'll stand up these pieces of wood and you throw the ball and see how many you can knock down. So there are lots of very similar games that spontaneously appear in many different cultures. Another variation is having a small ball, throwing the small ball and then trying to get the bigger balls close to the small one, very similar to the balls that you see when you visit France. And there are so many similar games in different countries, so it seems a universal thing of people's imaginations to invent similar games.
One more question.
Yes?
What is the difference between a play and a game?
Is this a what's the difference question? A play and a game. Well, if you're talking games, the verb is to play. You play a game. But if you use play as a noun, a play is something you see in the theatre. So, Hamlet is a play. It's a performance in the theatre. There's another play called Mousetrap. That's a play by Agatha Christie, which is the longest running play in history. It's still performed in London and it's been going since 1952.
That's amazing.
Yes, it is amazing. That could be an amazing fact. So that is what a play is. A play is something in the theatre. By strange coincidence, there was a game called Mousetrap back in the 70s. There was a board game which I never had. It was a very complicated game about catching a mouse. So there was a game called Mousetrap as well as a play. But that's the difference between a play and a game. Well, I think that's all we have time for on this programme. It's a bit short this week. Next week, as we don't have any classes, I'll probably still do a podcast. And I think I'll be talking about what's coming up in the next trimester. Maybe I'll do an introduction to the forthcoming book or something like that. Either way, we'll find something to talk about. So it was very nice to have our special guest speaker today, our computer-generated friend.
Thank you so much for inviting me onto the podcast.
So have a good week. Till next week. Bye.
See you later, alligator.